Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Heidi Lee Douglas. I'm the Communications and Campaign Director for Australian Parents for Climate Action, and I lead on the Parents and Media Spokesperson work and help parents engage with members of Parliament, both state and federal. And I want to thank you tonight for taking this moment, this night, to step up to the mic, to be a new parent spokesperson, or to be here to refresh your parent spokesperson skills. It's so important in the lead up to the federal election. So here's how the night will go. We're going to have a brief election update from our amazing CEO, Nick Seaton. Then I'll run through a truncated version of the Change the Story presentation, which talks about how to cut through to concerned audiences who are not yet active around climate, but could be. And I'll explain a touch about our new online parent spokesperson training that we're releasing this week. Then I'm going to pass over to Emma Hannigan from the Climate Media Centre, who will run through her media training, which includes a few throws to the audience to keep you on your toes. It's really going to be a jam-packed session of 2 hours of parents powering up. So we'll hold the questions over till the end, but if you have a burning question you think you'll forget, pop it in the chat, please, and Laura, our great community organiser out there, will track it for you and present it to me at the end. So before we dive in the deep end, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nations, whose land and water I'm coming to from today on the edge of Kamay or Botany Bay. It's land and water that was never ceded sovereignty. It's the place of the great warrior Pemulwuy. So in his spirit of brave leadership, I want to ask you to step up with me tonight to be the leaders of our community for our kids and our future generations. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and water on which each of you are present from tonight. And now we will pass over. Oh, sorry, one more thing. AP4CA recognises that there is no climate justice without social justice to our First Nations people. So I'll now pass over to Australian Parents for Climate Action CEO and Dad Extraordinaire Nick Seaton, who will give us a quick election update on this quite monumental day for climate action in Australia.
All right, thank you so much, Heidi, and thanks all, and thanks for being here, especially those of you who have parenting responsibilities that you're doing in parallel. Thanks also to my partner who's doing bedtime on my behalf tonight. So yeah, look, today is a really big day. We're in this interesting situation where you may have heard that today there was an announcement made by the government that they will commit to a 2050 net zero target, which is a funny thing because on the one hand, this is the first time that we've had bipartisan support for reducing carbon pollution to zero in Australian history. That's pretty profound and really exciting. And we also know that the MCA, the Minerals Council, the Business Council, the Murdoch media, and so on, aren't going to run some kind of scare campaign against this right now. So for the first time, we've got a clear shot at talking about reducing emissions to zero. But on the other hand, we know that we don't have anywhere near the scale and ambition of action required this decade and in this really important time. And that's something that we've heard from Labor, that both parties are yet to announce any of their policy detail on their carbon pollution reduction targets. But we understand that Labor will produce a point of differentiation and increase ambition on the coalition target for 2030. But we're yet to hear about that too. We also know that we need about 5 weeks run up for the election, and based on the probable and preferable dates for elections, it's looking increasingly unlikely that there will be an election before the end of the calendar year, which gives us both more time to pull our hair out, but also more time to make a difference. So it's both an opportunity and more of a lead up to the election. And we know that this is going to be a really important issue. That climate is one where it was already an important issue in the last election. It's almost a global focal point in this one. And with Morrison representing us at the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow next week, we know that there's going to be a lot of media continuing on this, not just today, but throughout that period and potentially over the summer as climate impacts possibly return. So the main thing I really want to remind everyone here of is that Australian Parents for Climate Action is really committed to making sure that political will is there and that it is bipartisan, so that both sides of politics are really going to do the right thing. And although this is a very small step today, we need to do a lot more. And so as a non-partisan organisation, we're going to continue to push for that. We're going to make sure that it's rapid and urgent ambition, because if it's not this decade, then it's not meaningful enough, especially for our kids. And we need to make sure that a safe climate is delivered through action and ambition that is tangible in this decade, starting now. And we also want to make sure that we're framing this as a positive, solutions-oriented opportunity for not just jobs and growth and whatever might speak to different types of audiences, but also for our kids, because this is their future. This is their nation, their nationhood, and the economy that they're going to inherit. And so we really want to make sure that we're framing this and this transition as a massive opportunity for Australia. And you may have already heard that we have our Solar Our Schools campaign and policy, which could create 7,000 renewable jobs, 4,000 teaching jobs and savings, and just be a really good no-brainer. And we're having already a lot of really positive conversations with all sides of politics about that. So there you have it. That's our little election wrap. Why are we here tonight? Because we need parent voices to make a difference. We need to make sure that we're putting pressure on candidates in this election and that they know that their constituents are talking and caring and speaking up for climate. And we know that parents in particular made a massive difference in the last election. Politicians are paying particularly close attention to what parents have to say. And we know that they have an incredibly powerful moral voice that we really want to make sure we are amplifying in this particular period and beyond, because let's face it, whoever wins government or your electorate, they're going to need to listen and to work on what their policies actually look like in those first 100 days after the election as well. So it won't finish there. But I'll leave it there. That's just a brief snapshot of where we're up to on the election, what next, and where our strategy has led us here tonight. So thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, so I am going to share my screen and talk through a truncated version of the Share the Story workshop. Let me just get this happening. And can you see what I need you to see, Nick? Can you just confirm that for me? You can see the presentation, Nick? Yep. Okay. So change the story. I've put this presentation together for our federal election communications and campaign strategy. It's a big picture framework for how we tell stories to cut through to new audiences. There's going to be a longer version of this on our modular training resource that we're launching this week, which is going to have a series of provocations that I want you to later on work through to really come up with your own version of the story for how you talk climate action to new audiences. So where we're going to start tonight is around the campfire. We humans are storytellers. Some people say it's indeed our greatest gift. It's how we unite, but it's also how we get divided. So how does story medicine play into that? And what is story medicine? So story medicine is the way that we can heal problems of society by harnessing the power of words we use to shape the past, present, and future. Myths and legends heal because they remind us of what's right and what's wrong and how to find balance again. So this presentation is asking, how can we change the stories we tell to heal the rifts in our society around climate change, and more specifically, to get bipartisan support for greater climate action? So here's your provocation. For the sake of the greater good, can you step outside of yourself, your opinions, your assumptions, to change the way that you tell the story of climate action and climate change to heal the rifts in society? So we're going to look at the Climate Compass Summary. It's that I've put together. It references a seminal report by 55.5, and it looks at different audience segments within Australia of where we're at in terms of climate. So you can see here 24% of people are alarmed, 6% alert, 24% cautious, concerned, and 18% cautious. So there's a very large section of the community in the middle there around concerned and cautious that we're really trying to reach out to. Most of our members, we would say, would fit into the alarmed or the alert category, and really to make a significant change in a widespread way, we need to reach out to the concerned and cautious audiences. So the alert and the alarmed are more likely to join an environmental organisation like AP4CA, but the concerned and cautious won't, according to this Climate Compass summary. So Our army for change is the alert and the alarmed, but we are trying to reach the concerned and the cautious. So the provocation is, can you as the alert and the alarmed shape your story to reach those concerned and cautious? In stories, the alert and the alarmed need to meet the needs of the cautious and the concerned rather than the other way round. And this is story medicine. So it's all about the framing. So here's some information around the concerned. You can see that 31% of them vote LNP and National, 33 Labor, and only 7% vote Green. Uh, so when we talk about nonpartisan engagement, um, can you put your political allegiances aside and disagree with the policy, not the party? Ask the party to change its policies because we won't get real action on climate until it is supported by both major parties. And how do we go about activating the concern? Because they have these so much potential. They have the potential to talk with their friends about climate action. They have the potential to sign a petition. They have the potential to vote for a party based on climate change. So, and our secondary audience, here's a quick summary about them. So 45% of them vote for the LNP, 29% ALP. So they're mostly LNP, and we want to ask them to make the LNP act on climate whilst addressing their main policy concerns, which we'll be unpacking later. So beating up the LNP will only distance them from us. What brings us all together from the Climate Compass summary is that 72% of Australians agree that we need to act on climate now. So when you do these provocations through our modular training, we'll go into more depth on each of these facts and how you can use them to shape your storytelling. 75% of Australians believe climate change will harm future generations, and 52% believe it will harm them personally. So in our worksheets for these provocations, we look at that. Australians are feeling uncertain, frustrated, and anxious about climate change. And these are the kinds of emotional differences that the Climate Compass summary has picked up between the alert and the alarmed and the concerned and the cautious. And I'd like you to think for yourself, which group are you in? And is this how you automatically communicate around climate change? Do you use words like panicked, scared, grieved, shocked, guilty? And can you instead use words that reach out to the concerned and the cautious, words that they more identify in terms of uncertain, helpless, surprised, confused? What are the ways to connect with Australians with low concerns about climate change? So, bushfires, drought, management of waste, pollution and air quality, extinctions of animals and wildlife. So, if we look at a provocation around that, how can you present your climate concerns to your local federal MP through one of these frames? We've seen how drought has ravaged our area, for instance, or I've lost what I've lost in the bushfires. So, it's about looking at through these provocations, how can you shape your story to connect with your MPs in a way that's going to be meaningful to them? What is more important than climate change to most Australians? Economic interests, costs of living, the economy, and healthcare. And what are the values? Fair and of the concerned. Here we go. The fair for everyone being fair and equal, economic security and wealth, and personal safety. So the presentation asks us, can we include in our messaging things that actually address those core values? So we must act on climate to be fair and equal, to give everyone a fair go, especially future generations, as an example. Australians like you, me, now and in the future don't have to pay a bigger price for not acting on climate change. And our main target audience, the concerned, these are the kinds of things that are really their major concerns of cost of living, healthcare, the economy, and jobs. So if we don't act on climate, it will increase our cost of living in the long run. If we don't act on climate, we will need to invest more in healthcare to remediate the physical and mental impacts when the system is already overburdened. These are the kinds of things that I'm going to cut the presentation short here, but when you do it online as the modular training, I'm going to be asking you to unpack the way you tell your stories in terms of climate action, so that they are addressing those concerns, concerned and cautious audiences. So I'm just going to wrap that up for now. I'll just stop my screen sharing. There we go. Okay. And so we'll be launching that modular training this week, and it will really take you through in bite-sized steps, resources on how to train up to have climate conversations, do media, write media releases, meet with your MP, localizing your Solar Our Schools pitch for your MP. So stay tuned for that later this week. And now I'm going to throw over to Emma Hannigan, who has been up since 6 a.m. this morning responding to the net zero announcement, and she is going to be going through her media spokesperson slide deck now.
Thank you, Heidi. And hello, everyone from Bundjalung country in Byron Bay. I'm Emma from the Climate Media Centre. So I come from a background as a journalist. Can everybody, I just want to check. You can all see that okay? Are you?
Not yet, I'm afraid.
Not yet. Let's try that again.
That looks promising. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm Emma Hannigan. I've been a journalist since I was about 15, really. It's sort of, it was my passion. When I moved to Australia, I worked at SBS for 11 years and in more recent times worked at the ABC here on the North Coast. I worked in my own media and communications company, predominantly working with CEOs of big corporates and executive teams around communications and how you tell your story. And so I've done a lot of media training. Now, the Climate Media Centre. So we are a PR agency for the climate. We like to think of ourselves as kind of a black ops team. We provide media support for groups like Australian Parents for Climate Action, bushfire survivors. We have Doctors for the Environment, farmers, a range of different people. And we provide proactive and reactive support. So we help people with putting their stories together. We go out and we find stories and spokespeople, and we react to media events like the one we had today. And the majority of us are all former journalists. So we have a theory of change, and it's clear messages delivered loudly and proudly by trusted voices over and over again. And that shifts the public narrative on climate change. Well, it shifts the public narrative on everything, really. You know, you think, just for example, today we had technology, not taxes. You know, we all know that stop the boats. It's the same messages over and over and over again. Now, they may not be trusted messengers to everyone, but this is why we have groups like Parents, because when you hear a message from someone who looks like you and sounds like you and you can relate to, like a farmer is not going to relate to anything I have to say, but he is going to relate to another farmer who looks like him and sounds like him and has the same life experience. Today, what we will do, we'll talk about media, tips, answering nice questions. We'll have some interview practice, and then at the end, we will have questions. So please pop your questions in the chat and Heidi and I can go through them at the end. So as a former journalist, one thing we're always looking for is case studies. I mean, I always worked in TV news, so you know the story yourself. You see every story has a case study, and it's the most powerful stories will have a real person's experience. Because, for example, I could tell you that, you know, X number of people have died from flu in the last year, but I could tell you, you know, show you a picture of a man playing with his daughter and say, you know, this is John. John's wife died from flu as she was giving birth to their daughter, and now he's encouraging everyone to get a flu vaccine. It's much more powerful, and that's where parents come in. We want to hear, they don't always want to hear from professors and doctors or politicians. People want to hear from you. So it raises the awareness, and then that helps to encourage people to take action and to promote the organization in a positive light. This is what you're hoping to do. The media wants a good story that's relevant, and it has good quotes and possible, if possible, pictures or footage that will grab the attention. So good photographs are always important with a story. So our top tips for communicating on climate change. This is about the urgency. So this is happening right now. Bushfires, floods, it's not happening in the future. And as you can see, this photograph was one that was taken during the 2019-2020 bushfires, where this young girl was being rescued and, from a boat. So it's always happening right now. We talk about people, not polar bears. So that goes back to what I've mentioned and Heidi has gone through, is that people connect to emotional stories. A picture of a polar bear on an ice floe might be sad, but it's not relevant to my life or your life. So real life impacts, not the science, the figures and the data. So Brené Brown, who is a fabulous storyteller and a researcher, she says that, stories are just data with a soul. So, it's not about not talking about the facts, figures, data or science, but it's about wrapping it up in a story that people can relate to. And again, we're talking local. If we want a global perspective, there are lots and lots of people out there who can give us that. When you break it down even further, so the local ABCs will not cover a story unless they have local talent, because that's what they're there for. So the more local you can be, the better, because it helps you to communicate. And this is a hard one, because I think this is something that we all struggle with a bit, is to acknowledge people's outdated views and seek to educate them. And that isn't always easy, particularly in this, we're sort of very polarized in our views at the moment. So you're talking about your values. So what do you value? So as a parent, I value having a safe place to live and having, a nice place for my children to grow up. It's all of these things, a nice world. I want them to be able to swim in the river and go to the beach and, play in the bush. So this is, again, human problems with human solutions. Again, it comes back to the personal stories. What can we do and how can we change things? And really, as Heidi just talked about there, a lot of that has to do with campaigning and talking to your MPs, but we have the power to do that. Pinpointing who's responsible and what should be done is a really important one, because it is a strategy that governments will take on issues where they try to push the responsibility back onto the individual, that everyone should be doing their bit. Whereas the reality is that there's very little that we as individuals can actually, on a global, your own personal carbon footprint doesn't really make a huge difference. What really makes a huge difference is government policies and changing the way that we do business. We want to have a positive picture of what that change looks like and what it will mean. So a lot of our campaigning is around things like, well, clean air is one. Looking at things like the number of jobs that are available in renewables, all of the positive parts that can come from this. And include everyone in solving the problem. So there's a role for all of us. And as we see with all of our groups, there is a role for everyone. And it's the same thing that, clear messages repeated over and over again by trusted voices. So this is an example from one of our bushfire survivors for climate action. They won a court case against the New South Wales Environmental Protection Agency. And they were just, a group of people who were tired and frustrated and didn't feel like they were getting the help that they needed. So when talking about the EPA decision, Janet doesn't talk about the court decision. She talks about her own experience. We've been through 3 bushfires in 3 years, so something must be done. So that's, personal experience. The more that can be done to prevent other families from going through what happened to us, the better. Now the government will have to do something. They will have to have clear policies on climate change to reduce carbon emissions. So she gets the point in there at the end, but she still has, at the top of the article, talked about her personal story of losing her home. So it is always good to have those, like, why are you doing this? What motivates you to be involved? And thinking about that moment. So your mission is to deliver climate action, secure, future-focused jobs, a healthy economy and environment. Climate inaction, severe costs to the economy and to the environment. So when we come to messaging when you're doing interviews, there are always going to be key messages. Now, generally, you will probably be provided with some key messages from Heidi or from ourselves, but think about what it is you want to talk about. Get your 3 main points and make sure that you know what you want to say and you know the messages that you want to deliver, and make sure and have them written down. Now, it's not about writing them down and learning off the answer. It's about your key points. Like, what are the things that I really want to get across? And, you know, when kids are doing, when I was a kid, I was doing debates and we had those little debate cards. It's kind of like that. It's like prompts to yourself to remember what you want to say. And, you know, what do you want people to think or feel or do? What action do you want them to take after they've heard you talking about it? And it's, you know, different ways of doing, you know, getting your key messages across all the time. And you hear politicians do it all the time. You know, you want them to be sick of listening to your key messages. So for Australian Parents for Climate Action, the key messages are urgent climate action supported by all sides of politics so that we can make the climate safe for our kids. We need a national plan to slash climate pollution this decade and see both major political parties increase their carbon pollution reduction targets for 2030. And to make this roadmap a reality, we're asking the LNP and the ALP to commit to solar our schools with solar panels and batteries for all school and childcare centres. I'm going to put my glasses on. So the big asks here are, we want climate action to be a non-partisan issue. We need a national plan to slash climate pollution by 2030. And a tangible commitment on that roadmap is for both parties, both of the major parties, to commit to supporting solar our schools. So it's really, you know, about breaking down the message and then keep repeating that, keep banging that drum. So there is a structure to how you answer questions, and it's like any story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it's sort of like a sandwich structure. So when you're doing media interviews, particularly if it's for news grabs, as we call them, for radio news, you want to be getting around a 30-second answer, because any more than that, and it gets too much. And you're only ever going to, I mean, the ABC's rules around radio grabs are no more than 15 seconds. So 10 to 15 seconds. And for TV news, it can be even less. So think about your introduction, like your openings, that broad top layer of what you want to say. Then you put the detail in the middle, and at the end, you sum it up and put your, you know, what is it that you're asking for, you know, your call to action at the end. So for example, this is from Amanda McKenzie, who is the CEO of the Climate Council. So what is the message behind this report? So Amanda starts with, the message is that climate change is well underway. So nice, easy top line. The filling. The sea level rise report that's come out today shows that in some Australian cities, the suburbs like Altona in Melbourne, Narrabeen in Sydney, Fremantle in Perth, on the current trajectory, will be experiencing major flooding every year rather than rare events every 100 years. So that's pretty much sums up what's in the report. And then to sum everything up, to finish. So climate change is absolutely upon us. It's dangerous, it's happening quickly, and our government has still got its head in the sand. And that's Amanda McKenzie. So if we're looking at Australian Parents for Climate Action, here's a sample question of something, you know, an easy, nice question. What action does Australian Parents for Climate Action want from the government? So we have, sorry, I've just got to move you guys out of the way. We need a national plan to slash climate pollution by 2030 with strong targets that at a minimum match the United States, the United Kingdom, other trading partners such as the EU and Japan. Now, you could even make that shorter and say, we need a national plan to slash climate pollution by 2030. So the filling, what are we, what is it that we want? We're asking both major political parties to commit to 75% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. This is the most appropriate target for Australia to be doing our fair share so that we can ensure a safe climate for our children. And then to sum it up at the end, as a tangible commitment on the roadmap to this target, we're asking both the LNP and the ALP to commit to supporting our Solar Our Schools policy. And again, you could end it there. So let's see. I have somehow made you all disappear.
Are you wanting to throw some questions out, Emma?
I do. I somehow managed to get rid of you all. Let me just see. Okay. No.
So I could suggest some people for you, Emma.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Heidi.
No problem. Let me just put everybody in my view. Well, let's start with throwing to Louise Shepherd. What should Australia be doing when it comes to climate change? So Emma, do you want to lead Louise into that? I can see Louise there, ready and waiting, hungry.
Sorry, Louise. I went forward one. Oh, okay. So Louise, what should Australia be doing when it comes to climate change?
Well, really, we should have far more drastic policies, far more drastic reductions than we currently have. So emissions need to be slashed this decade, not waiting till 2050.
Oh, perfect. And really nice, short, succinct. That was absolutely great. Thank you, Louise. Okay, Heidi, who's next on the hit list?
We've got Ursula clapping her hands. I think she's ready to go.
Okay, Ursula, you're up.
I was clapping Louise.
That was your mistake. You drew attention to yourself.
Thanks, Emma and Heidi.
So, Ursula, why are you concerned about climate change?
Because Australia and the world has so much potential to turn this around and change society, the environment, and our jobs for the better. And the risks if we don't are so great, and the benefits if we do are also so great and worth it.
Good. Now, one thing I would say, and I forgot to mention this at the start, is it's always really good if you repeat my question back to me. So if I say, what did you have for breakfast? You would say, well, this morning for breakfast, I had cornflakes. Because it allows me as a journalist to get a clean into that question. So I don't have to write my way into the question. You've already told me and explained to me what you're talking about.
So it's a full sound bite if you need the sound bite.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, who is up next, Heidi?
Does anybody feel like they want to volunteer themselves and put their hand up? No takers as yet. Oh, Susie's there. Yay. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you, Susie.
Dorothy Dixer. Hi.
So, Susie, can you tell us what other benefits can programs such as Solar Our Schools bring to Australians?
Yeah, there's enormous benefits from the Solar Our Schools program. It's not only in emission reductions, but also the enormous number of jobs. So up to 11,000 jobs would be created in the solar and education industries from putting solar panels and batteries in schools. And also a lot of savings to the schools themselves from all those reduced energy bills. So up to about $15,000 or $12,000 in a small school. And I've forgotten the figure for the large school.
Well, see, so Susie, that was really good. You started off so well because you repeated the question back to me and you gave me great top lines, but it was too long. So you need to, think about it as almost like a paragraph, or almost, like three sentences in a way. The benefits that programs like Solar Our Schools can bring to Australia are enormous. Not only are we providing solar power to these schools, but it also provides X, Y, Z jobs. And therefore, that's why we would like the government to commit to Solar Our Schools. So you're wrapping it back up again in a nice, neat bundle. But really good. Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got more questions. Any takers?
Anybody want to put their hand up? Andrew Rivet. Thank you, Andrew, for volunteering. Stepping up to the mic.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hello.
I did an event at the weekend with 200 Zoom participants. So this is a bit easier.
That's a good effort.
So Andrew, can you tell me, what do you want the government to do to tackle emissions?
I want the government to take greater action, particularly prior to 2030. The climate crisis is upon us now, and we're seeing catastrophic events, and something really needs to be changed right now. I really want bipartisan agreement to see major change, major action happening towards reducing our emissions by 2030, at least by 75% would be my wish.
Really good, Andrew, really good. You started off well, you answered the question back. You hit a lot of good points. We had urgency in there. We had 75% 2030. Again, it was just a wee bit too long. But if you were preparing that question, and same for everyone, if you were pre-preparing that question, you'd write it down and then you would probably edit it. So,
yeah.
I always say, always write the shitty first draft, like everybody, so what we're asking you guys to do is hard. Okay, who is next?
Anybody putting their hands up to go next? Just trying to scan through everybody on the screen.
Melinda, you ready?
Oh, come on, we've got to have a Queenslander for me. I do a lot of my work in Queensland.
Is there any Queenslanders in the room?
Or anyone from Byron?
Melinda, yep, she's got a hand up. Hi, Melinda.
Sydney.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Melinda. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Sydney.
Oh, but you're a Queenslander.
Oh.
Okay, Melinda, can you tell us what emission targets would you and Australian Parents for Climate Action like to see?
Yeah, myself and other parents are part of a very large group of people who'd like to see different targets to what the current government have. I'd like to see 75% of 2005 emissions reduced by 2030, and then zero net emissions by 2035. My kids deserve it.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, you got us with the kids. That's brilliant. Excellent. And really good because of who you're a spokesperson for. So yeah, you started off really well. You responded to the question. You had the figures right. I think that at this point, the 75% reduction by 2030 is fine. That we don't have to go into all, obviously that's not up to me, that's up to Australian Parents for Climate Action. But as a journalist, I would say you don't have to go into the fine detail. You can make assumptions that people know, there is shorthand and people know what you're talking about. And to sum it up by talking about your kids is absolutely perfect.
So when you say emissions targets, what are targets? What's the shorthand? I don't really understand. So you mean not saying the
emissions target cuts. Emissions cuts targets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sorry if there was any confusion there, Melinda.
No worries. Thanks.
And have we got one more person?
Anybody else want to pop up their hand?
Oh, Nat Swanson has her hand up.
Excellent.
Okay, Nat. What would government funding for Solar Our Schools do for the wider economy?
Well, by funding Solar Our Schools, not only would the government be making a positive step for emissions reductions, but it would create, I think, 11,000 jobs across the country, including in the regions that so desperately need it, and also allow schools to save thousands so they can reinvest in our kids' education.
Fantastic. That was great. Great start. you mentioned the jobs, and you got regions in there, which is really good. Jobs and regions, money, saving money for schools, all of these things. You know, think about what we all care about. All of us want to be able to, you know, pay our rent or our mortgage. We want to have good schools for our kids to go to. We want them to be safe. We want good healthcare. Like, all of those things are universal. We all care about. So it's really, you know, brilliant to be taking those points in as well. So for interviews, here are some interview tips. Oh, all right. Breathe. So I always, particularly especially if when I'm doing something live, I do a lot of sort of deep belly breathing to sort of calm my system, because it really helps, you know, it really helps to slow down your heart rate and just to make you feel a bit better. And speak descriptively and paint pictures for the audience. So you think about when you're talking to a journalist about your own story, your connection, like, why am I doing this? So for, you know, I mean, I've been heavily invested in climate change, in the climate change movement, since I saw the documentary, Al Gore's documentary. So for me, today is just a huge thing. You know, I'm just so thrilled that we finally got here. But the real moment for me was when, in the middle of the 2019-2020 fires, there was a fire quite close. I mean, it was 15 kilometers. It wasn't that close, but it was close enough. But it was all around. There was fires everywhere. There was smoke everywhere. And we were trying to shield our kids from it as much as possible, and not, you know, try not to, you know, keep things calm so they didn't panic. But I went into my daughter's bedroom one day and I found a bag that had pajamas and books. She's a huge reader, so there were a lot of books in there, and a toothbrush and a bathroom bag and some clothes. And I was like, what's all this? Are you planning on running away from home, Lola? And she said, oh, it's just in case we have to evacuate, just in case the fire comes. And that really, really brought it home for me that I don't want my children to have to do this every single year, because it's so stressful. The fear that goes on for months, and we weren't even in, you know, I wasn't even in an area that was hugely impacted. I can't even begin to imagine. But I just thought, this is not, you know, we really, really need to do something. So think about, was there a moment where you thought, I need to join Australian Parents for Climate Action because I have to do more than I'm doing right now? What was that moment that made you have that feeling? And think about that. What's your story? What's your why? Because that's really important to journalists. And speak descriptively, you know, talk about, it was a Sunday, we were in a forest, she was wearing a red dress, I was reading this book, you know, it smelled like coffee, whatever it is. Think about those things, because that will make you good talent. However, that is, again, if you're doing a longer, say, a feature piece. But, you know, I mean, I guess you can still do it in shorter, but you've got to just be careful. With the radio grabs, yeah, 30-second answers, radio or TV grabs. And correct errors. So if you've made a mistake in what you've said, it's totally fine to say, oh, actually, let me correct that. And when you're doing interviews with people and they're pre-recorded, people, I mean, I guess people who are used to being interviewed all the time do it all the time. They'll go, oh, actually, I'm just going to take that question again. You know, they'll stop in the middle of a sentence and go, no, that's not right. I'm going to do that again. And journalists are just used to doing that all the time. So don't ever worry about doing that. And, you know, when you're talking about these issues, you know, you have people like this morning, Matt Canavan said that that people who were predicting the end of coal were like Chicken Little. But that's wrong. He was wrong. The things that he was saying were wrong. There's evidence to prove that. And I mean, I guess luckily for the listening public, it was Fran Kelly and she took him up on it. So, you know, it's okay to correct people's errors. And often, most journalists will say, is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to add? And this can be your golden opportunity to get in what you really wanted. If you felt like you didn't quite get the answer that you wanted, or there was something you wanted to repeat, or you didn't quite get it, just go for it, or talk about your passion, talk about why you're involved, talk about why you want to do it. Because for me, that often ends up with the gold in the interview. You just get such really good gems from people. Another one about when you're doing interviews is if it is a pre-recorded interview, often a journalist will ask you what you think. They're like, why are you asking me the same question? But often I will ask the same question a couple of times, maybe in a different way, because you've told me something in our pre-interview and I want you to say that thing. And it's like, I know you have it there. I know you have that answer. So I want you to say the thing you said in the interview. So don't worry about it. It's totally fine. It doesn't mean they're not listening to you. And yeah, this is one, gesticulate, use your hands, talk with your hands, feel natural. Don't feel like you have to stand like this. It's totally okay. Oh. Okay, nevers. Here are nevers. Argue, interrupt, or get angry. You won't be called again, and it's all on record. So you really don't want to get into that. You want to, and especially the interrupting thing, just, keep your cool. Again, rambling 30 seconds. Or never lie or bluff your way. It's totally fine to say, that's not my area of expertise, or I don't have the answer for that question, or I'm sorry, that's not something that I'm qualified to tackle. Totally fine. And people say it all the time. It's, don't lie or bluff your way through it. Negative words. So if somebody says, oh, climate action is just going to ruin regional communities. Well, you wouldn't say, well, climate action isn't going to ruin regional communities, because you don't want to be repeating those negative words. You want to try and stick with the positive words. The thing is, no matter how good you are, sometimes, we don't have any control. We only control what we're saying. We don't control if the story is published, or where and when it's published, or what it looks like. You can control what you say and how you say it. And that's it. And then you just have to let it go. So now I just want to see if we have questions, Heidi.
Yes, we do have some questions. So the last question that popped up was, can you talk about pre-interviews, Emma? What is a pre-interview?
Oh, so maybe not so much these days when things are very fast, but if I'm going to interview someone, I will ring them first and have a conversation with them. And based on that conversation, I will write my questions. So it's a good thing. So if somebody wants to do, it doesn't always happen, but generally, if I haven't spoken to you before, I will call you and just say, well, what is your experience? Why are you involved? What do you think about this? And that's how you would form the interview from there. So really, it's just, a phone call.
And I would just say that with our narrative training work that I do with parents, we go through that process where I have a conversation with you and find out what your story is, and then often pitch it back to you and then encourage you to write a narrative of your own based on that conversation. The training module that we're providing, which has already been road tested and guinea pigged around Australia, has a really easy how-to guide of how to write your personal narrative. And once we have that for AP4CA, we can then use that to pitch media stories about you. We can use it to do opinion pieces with you for targeted moments, like we have with Deanna Hayes, for instance, with the Canberra Times, with lots of our parent members. So we sort of do that process as we step you through the media spokesperson training to empower you in incremental steps along the way. And part of the modular training that we're rolling out is also to giving you the framework for those great climate conversations, which is a great way to also practice your narrative, is with your community so that you feel comfortable telling your story, what motivates you, also trying to tap into what motivates the people you're talking to, like I talked about with the Climate Compass work. How can you reframe your story so that it reaches the audience that you're trying to tap into? So we work through that a bit with the narrative training framework that we're delivering, the modular training. So
I see Martin has a question there as well.